This is the last Sunday of the season of Epiphany. When we celebrated Epiphany in January, we were remembering on Epiphany the story of the wise men that came from afar and found the infant Christ and the family and worshiped Jesus. And that whole wonderful symbol system of that story, we unpack that a bit on Epiphany, and we've been unpacking it throughout this season. One of the things that this day lifts up for us is a final set of symbols in the story of Jesus' transfiguration. And in that story, we have another set of symbols that if we take a moment to understand a little bit about why those symbols are there and what is the story saying to us through them, that can help us understand, I think, how to walk with this story in our lives of Jesus' transfiguration. So I want to begin by reminding us a little bit about the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke is the longest of the four Gospels, and it's also one of the later Gospels in the time it was written. But it is also has a lot of common source material with the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest Gospel, and the Gospel of Matthew. So those three Gospel books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels, deriving from the Greek words S-Y-N, syn, that means together, and optic, which means viewed or viewing. So basically, these three are viewed together because they have viewed the same material. So they draw from that. John does not have the story of the Transfiguration, but the Synoptic Gospels do, and they treat it differently. Mark and Matthew simply reveal the story of the Transfiguration, and it becomes a bit of a theological reflection on the nature of Jesus. Luke is doing something different with great intention. And that's why I chose today to read the rest of what is associated with that reading, which in some ways seems and feels a little disconnected, because it goes on into the next day. And Luke does this theological moment of the Transfiguration and the experience of that. But then he has the next day when they come off the mountain into the world, into this other experience. So I'm going to connect those a little bit for us. First of all, to unpack a little bit of this moment when Peter is saying to Jesus, "Oh my gosh, it's so good that we are here." Firstly, we have these two people who are with Jesus. We've got Moses and Elijah. And Moses representing so many things in the history of the early faith tradition leading up to Jesus. He represents the bringing of the law, sort of the way that the community of the Israelites were to relate to God as a contract. And the law unpacks how you live into that relationship. And we heard in the Old Testament reading how another mountain is associated with this whole story. And we've heard how Moses is transformed by that. But we've also heard another symbol there, very important, which is a veil. That Moses is veiled from the people, and the people are not able to sort of see God through Moses because of that veil. And Moses lives that when he is in communication with God, but only Moses gets to have communication directly and experience directly of God, and sort of becomes a transmuter for that to the people and the community. So that person standing there representing the past, the history and tradition currently as it's known before Christ. Elijah. That figure represents what sort of followed the books of the law, the Pentateuch, and becomes all this experience of the prophets following the law, which is a community of folks and people that God has sort of singled out to continue to bring certain revelation and understanding and warnings and interpretation. So we have that all the books of the prophets kind of come there. And Elijah really representing in his generation of all the prophets, representing how the Messiah is going to come. So you better be ready, and you better be sorry, and you better be right with God, and all that messaging to Israel. So he's representing Judah's projected future in all of that. So we have the past and the future voices, all sort of leading up to this moment that is Jesus, the Messiah. And Jesus, in the midst of the past and the projected future, represents the immediate now, the present, the fulfillment of the law, and the fulfillment of all the prophecy. So the prophecies and the past, right now. Very important setup. When Peter says, it's so cool that you guys are all here together, let's build, it says dwellings is the interpretation in the gospel we heard today from the New Revised Standard Version. If you go back to the Greek word, and you're hearing the word Sukkot. Sukkot refers to two things in the Hebrew tradition. Sukkot is a word that refers to a temporary small dwelling. Sukkots were built out of natural vegetation that would have been available, and they were specifically used in an agricultural time, even dating before the Israelites are captured in Egypt. So the Israelites, when they're sort of very loose tribal family affiliations, are agriculturalists that when it comes time to harvest, that is such a busy time, that they would build these little temporary shacks so that out in the fields, so they could stay there and rest and have protection from the elements when things got bad while they were harvesting. In the Hebrew tradition, the month that happens is associated with the harvest time. And even today, Sukkot is kind of celebrated around the end of September, early October, depending on where that moves. So it's associated with the harvest. And that's another way to understand it as the festival of the booths, or Sukkot, and the festival of ingathering, a real harvest time. So what Peter is sort of referring to there is, this is cool. We've obviously come here on an intentional pilgrimage, just like pilgrimage was associated with Sukkot among the Israelites to Jerusalem. He said, so this is a new pilgrimage place. Let's build some of these booths for you. And all of a sudden, things evaporate. And this cloud moment comes in, right? This kind of cloud of unknowing that we might have, where things are very mystical. Nobody is really seeing. And all of a sudden, they're surrounded by this very disorienting experience. And you hear God's voice saying, this is my son. Listen to him. And it's like this assurance that Luke wants to give to his community. When Luke is writing his gospel, he addresses it to, it almost feels like a name, Theophilus. Luke's gospel is addressed to somebody named Theophilus. When we unpack, what does that Greek word mean? Whose name is that? It means lover of God. So it's written to all the people who love God. Dear lover of God, this is what I want you to know about the teachings of Jesus and how the early community relates the experience of Christ to tradition and to what was projected about him. And so this comes to a full, rich, symbolic moment. And Luke uses the symbols of this story to really say something extraordinary. Not only making that theological set of statements, but then saying, the next day, Jesus comes down into the midst of where people live. And he's immediately approached by a father in the crowd, appealing on behalf of his son. So now just a second here. What is it that Elijah and Moses and Jesus have been talking about the day before up on the mount? It says they've been talking about when Jesus is going to depart. They're talking about how he's going to go into Jerusalem and be killed and be crucified and die. They're talking about that. The nearest modern equivalent I can come to about that is if you've read or seen the Harry Potter movies or books. There's a moment in the final movie and in the last book when Harry has the resurrection stone. And that stone empowers him to see his loved ones who've already died, that he's connected to. And if you remember, he asks them a series of questions, and he looks at them and says, "Will it hurt when I die?" And the response from his father is, "It'll only be a moment, and it'll be over." And so I almost think that there's some kind of real conversation happening there. Because these were real people, Elijah and Moses, handed down in tradition as figures. And here's Jesus, who, as divine as he is also mortal. And is about to have to live through with enormous trust in his Father this amazing series of events. His death, his entombment, and the resurrection. So you can imagine what they're talking about there, about what that means, about what that is. And I think, on some level, that's going to hurt. And what will that be like? So they're talking. He comes down the next day, and they're in the midst of another father-son relationship, like God the Father and Jesus. And a father says that there is this evil spirit that seems to be taking over my son, and it's making him unwell, and he cannot be part of the community. Because when Jesus rebukes the generation, I think what's happening there is we know that people who are ill, people who manifested anything from associated with when you have, what am I blanking on here? You're having spells of sort of seizures, right? And they would associate that with evil spirits. So there's a medical condition perhaps, but it's being associated. And because it's associated with evil spirits, as all illness was associated with sin, that obviously God didn't love him. And so the community ought not love him, but should set him aside. So I think Jesus is rebuking the generation that's doing that, that's living out an old past context, and inviting them into a new one. And he says, how long am I going to have to tolerate this? How long will this go on? When you keep rejecting people instead of working toward their healing, as well as the healing and integration of the community. Because that work of healing of someone like that takes us all. So he addresses this spirit or this illness, and it departs and he's healed. So the two actions that are happening the day after this revelation and coming down into the community of the now is the actions of healing, but not just the individual, but the community, and the actions of confronting evil. The evil that separates people one from another. The evil that vilifies people and scapegoats them. The evil that says you must not be loved by God if this horrible thing is happening to you. The evil that alienates and judges. If Jesus is representing the now, and as Paul writes to his letter, to his communities in his letters, Paul is saying, the now of Jesus for us in every generation and age is the now of the Holy Spirit that is manifested through us. The action of the Holy Spirit that is given to us for Luke is exactly what happens the next day after that transfiguration. This action of the Holy Spirit through you and me are to be actions in the community of our world that demonstrate and bring healing and that confront the evils of the world. In the now of our time, we very much can see where those forces still operate. And just as there were arguments among the community in the time of Jesus, and arguments in the community at the time of the gospel writers, and in the time of Paul, there were arguments within the Christian followers about what really was constituting the truth, and what the community should still believe about God and our relationship with him. There were some who still brought forward a lot of the past belief that Jesus came to fulfill. They brought forward the belief of a prosperity gospel, that if you were doing well, no matter how you got to that place of doing well, it was because God loved you. So anything you did, no matter how dubious, is okay. Because you had lots of money, so that must mean you're blessed. and your actions are okay because you're super special, you're chosen. We still have that ideology walking around. We also still have the idea that if you're poor, you must not be so loved by God. You're not working hard enough. It's your fault. And we still have this idea that there are people who are privileged. Today we call it white racism, white privilege. The idea that there is still a white supremacy has raised its head again in our country and in our time. The idea that not everyone deserves health care. The idea that it's still okay to vilify people of color or other sexual orientation is still with us. And in fact, is being renewed and re-energized. In our now, we are asked to go into our communities, our worlds, and our families and have conversations that encourage the healing of relationship, the acceptance of difference, and the resurrection of God's love in our time. On this last day of Epiphany, I want to one last time draw your attention to the symbols that are on our two altars. I asked the altar guild to leave up the figures of the wise men and the infant Jesus on both of these altars. And Nancy Smith allowed me the loan of these little gifts that are represented in gold, frankincense, and myrrh on the side altar. Gold representing the action of the love that values other people and that values creation. Because all creation is part of the salvation story. In the Nativity, there's animals, there's stars, there's heaven, and there's earth. And then the frankincense, used in worship and purification, representing how we are to go and bring Christ's presence and worship what is in front of us, not just what is in our sanctuary. And then the myrrh, used in healing, lots of healing arts. And we are to be a healing presence of Christ to individuals and to the community. So on this last Epiphany, as we enter the season of Holy Lent, the question is, are we prepared to be these kinds of gifts in a world that so needs them in our now? These gifts of valuing, these gifts of healing, these gifts of purification and worship. In the season of Lent, the question becomes, when people encounter you as a gift, will they see a booby prize? Will they see an unwrapped stone ready to be hurled? Or will they encounter healing and love and mercy and grace and the challenge every day to be for one another what Christ has been for us and for every generation? We are to be Christ in the world now.